past week from a Dr. Ann Doig. She is the new president of the Canadian Medical Association. And she told the Canadian press that things are imploding in the Canadian universal health care. What's interesting is that position is voted for by the people, and she said some almost some would call extreme comments about the Canadian medical system, which we always hear people say, oh, it's fine, there's no problems here. Here's what she said. She said, we all agree that the system is imploding, and we all need to agree that things are much more precarious, perhaps, than Canadians realize. So she's seeing things that even the Canadians aren't seeing. She said that patients are getting less than optimal care and that there must be change. We're all running flat out of ideas. We're just trying to stay ahead of the immediate day-to-day demands. And the outgoing president of the Canadian Medical Association, Dr. Robert Ouellet, said there's a critical need to make Canada's healthcare system patient-centered. So the outgoing president says that Canada's universal healthcare system needs to become patient-centered, meaning right now it is not patient-centered. He said there could be a role for private healthcare delivery within the public system. So basically, we're trying to turn into Canada, and they're trying to turn back into what we have here in America. Dr. Doig also said that a long-term goal would be getting health systems talking to each other so that information can be quickly shared. The fact that she says that also indicates that apparently right now in Canada they are not talking to each other. She said Canadians have to understand that if it keeps going on like this without change, it is not sustainable. That is the new president of the Canadian Medical Association. Also about health care, I saw this on the Huffington Post, which, as you know, certainly is not a bastion of conservative thought. They have a story that says the White House and the pharmaceutical lobby secretly had this behind doors deal where they agreed to go along with health care reform if they gave in to some of the administration's demands. Apparently, a knowledgeable healthcare lobbyist had prepared these negotiations, and he lists exactly what the White House gave up and what it got in return. And what they did was these pharmaceutical companies said that they would allow for importation of drugs from Canada. They agreed not to pursue Medicare rebates or shift drugs from Medicare B to D because they've been doing some switching so they can get more money on it. This will cost big pharmaceutical companies billions of dollars in reimbursements. In exchange, the Pharmaceutical Researchers and Manufacturers Association agreed to cut $80 billion in projected costs to taxpayers and senior citizens. And the White House denies this memo is real, but the Huff and Puff Post stands by the memo. I remember back during the Bush years when universal health care was bandied about, and they always claimed that Bush was against health care reform because, he was in the pockets of the big evil pharmaceutical companies. But that the whole evil pharmaceutical companies, apparently that's just so 80s, because now we have people like Waxman and Rockefeller demanding that health insurance companies release to Congress and to the Senate things like CEO pay and money spent on conventions, because they want transparency in the health insurance companies. Of course, they don't want it with themselves, as we all know. We had Obama had a couple of town hall meetings, and it was quite striking. He's changed his wording, as you know. He started to use the term health insurance reform rather than health care reform. Then we had HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius saying that she said Obama would be willing to put the public option off the table, i.e. remove the government-run health care. Then, of course, Obama had to come back and reiterate his position, which no one's really sure what his position is. A lot of the liberals, when they heard that what they perceived as was a cave, that he was caving, said you cannot have health reform without a public option. It's not real reform, they argue, without the public option. So then, of course, you had White House Press Secretary Gibbs, who cleared it all up. He cleared it all up by saying, quote, well, again, I think I would dispute that characterization. I think, again, particularly at the events that you saw the president do, I don't think you noticed a lack of support for providing health care reform among those that were outside of the president's events, he said. So that clears everything up. A Gallup poll last week found 69% of Americans that were watching the anger-ridden town hall meetings. So they said 69% of them watching had a more favorable view of the protesters, and i.e. a more favorable view of the anti-reform movement, while just 21% said it has made them less sympathetic. Speaking of town hall meetings, I know all of you have heard about our Congressman Mass's statements in the past week. I encourage you all again to go to his town hall meetings. I believe he has one on Almond Monday in Hornell, September 3rd. Massa, house.massa.gov. Check it out. Now is not the time to back off. I won't get into a lot of what he said. He did. I don't think a lot of people have mentioned he did call us a right-wing district. I'm sure the Blue Dog Democrats love to hear that. So I hope you all can attend at least one town hall meeting. Obama also had this webcast talking about healthcare, and it was mostly with those over 65, a lot of AARP and Medicare recipients. And you can get the text of it on WashingtonPost.com, and it was very telling. He had this woman who called in, and she said this. She said, if I decide when I'm 80 that I want a hip replacement, am I going to be able to get that? Am I going to be able to see a cardiologist, or if I have a heart condition or other specialist? I'm calling this rationing of care. I'm calling it that. And Obama says, that's an excellent question, Carol, and I appreciate it, blah, 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 blah. Here's what he said. He said, quote, my interest is not in getting between you and your doctor, although keep in mind right now insurance companies are often getting between you and your doctor. It's not as if these choices aren't being made already. What we've said is we just want to provide some guidelines to Medicare and, by extension, the private sector about what works and what doesn't. So here he is admitting himself that government regulations that affect Medicare and eventually H.R. 3200 or whatever other bill may be passed will also directly affect your private health care insurance. By extension, his words, because they know full well that a government-run program will eventually become the only program, and as we said, that is their intent. He also said this, quote, some of you may have heard we want to set up what we're calling an IMAC, an independent medical advisory committee that would, on an annual basis, provide recommendations about what treatments work best and what gives you the best value for your healthcare dollar. That is rationing. That is someone coming in and sitting down and looking at you and saying, we think we can do this for you, we don't want to do that for you, and that's just the way it is. But within the same paragraph, he said, quote, so we don't want to ration. So he says we don't want to ration. We just want to provide guidelines, and it is not my interest to get between you and your doctor. He has not qualified that by saying, I will not get in between you and your doctor. We do not want to ration. He's very good. He's very good with words. He also said, you know what? We don't think that if we said we don't think this senior should get a hip replacement, what we would say is we want to provide information to that senior and to her doctor about, this is the thing that's going to be most helpful to you in dealing with your condition. So he's pretty much saying the exact opposite in the span of a breath. Another caller called in. He said, if the new health care reform bill is so great for all Americans, why are members of Congress and other arms of the government excluded from having to participate? And Obama had no answer to that whatsoever. They've said that the public option is not the essential element. That's their new phrase. It's not the essential element. It is the preferred option. A lot of people now are saying that that this whole plan is imploding, that the administration is floundering. But I don't give it that much credit. I think he is got another strategy going on here. I don't think it's time to give up. I think it's time to just keep pushing harder, because as we know, next week we might have a completely different story on all of this. You've been listening to the Amy McManus Show on AM 1480